Good day, everyone. This is Travis Bembenek, owner and CEO of Mexico News Daily, with my friend George. Hi, George.
Buenos dias, Travis.
You know, as George and I have been recording some episodes on Confidently Wrong, we got talking about how maybe we should just pause and kind of reflect on and share what we went through a week ago today, which was, of course, the day that the Mexican military took action and actually took out and killed the head of the new generation Jalisco cartel, El Mencho. And the reason I think our perspectives are interesting to share is that, you know, I lead a news organization, so obviously it was a crazy day for us. And George and his family actually live relatively close, and he has friends throughout the area to where this all went down. So I think we both kind of have interesting perspectives to talk through. So George, why don't you start? I mean, it was Sunday morning. You were probably finishing surfing or driving your golf cart around town or something, and sort of how did you find out about this?
Well, there were rumors circulating the day before, right, that this had happened, and nobody knew what was true, but there were definitely rumors on our text threads starting on Saturday, which was weird because he wasn't even captured until Sunday, and then Sunday morning when I woke up, it sort of seemed like it was just going to be a normal day, and then my phone just started blowing up. Probably around, 10 in the morning. Everyone was like, have you seen what's going on in Vallarta? And, that's sort of when the WhatsApp groups just started blowing up. And, now looking back, what was disheartening is that a lot of the stuff that was being shared on WhatsApp, turned out to be basically fake news, right? But it definitely scared us. We live, about 40 minutes north of Puerto Vallarta, and I came to my office. Unfortunately, I work on Sundays, and was working in my office thinking that this was going to blow over, and then the text kept coming through, and my wife called and said, you need to get home. All this is happening. Our kids are scared. You need to get home. And I packed up the office and went home and was basically just glued to the phone and texting all my friends. And of course, relatives, family, friends, everybody in the States is now, as it progressed in the afternoon, watching the American news media, and everyone's like, are you okay? Are you okay? And we were totally fine. It did not make it sort of up to Sayulita. Town basically went into shutdown mode. All the bars and stores and tiendas and everything closed down, and it felt like a ghost town. That day was definitely scary, and everybody was sort of ready for it to be over. And then, waking up on Monday morning, it was, at least in Sayulita, it just sort of started to come back to life. And then Monday afternoon is sort of when we started to realize that, while Puerto Vallarta did have a bunch of burning cars, it was very disruptive and roadblocks, but we started to realize, no, Costco did not burn down. The church did not burn down. There was not a plane that had been lit on fire on the tarmac in Puerto Vallarta, So a lot of that heaviness sort of started to be lifted when we realized that, a lot of it was, inaccurate, fake news. But it was scary, No one wants to be in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, my wife and I live in San Miguel de Allende, but at the time we were in Mexico City. And, if anyone has ever done it, Sunday mornings in Mexico City, a lot of the big roads are closed in Centro, and you can just walk around on the streets. So we were doing that. And I started getting some text messages from some of our staff. We have 3 people in the Jalisco between, Guadalajara, Vallarta, and north, where you are, area. And they started, right away sending messages to me saying, do you want us to start writing about this? Even though it's Sunday morning and, our team isn't really working then. They said, do you want us to start writing? And we made I said, yeah, start. And then, literally over a matter of minutes, it just scaled up the intensity of headlines and rumors and pictures and videos, to the point where, we pulled together a team of 17 people to start working on it immediately on Sunday. At the same time, my wife and I were on our way to the Mexico City North bus station to take a bus home. And while we're in the Uber, we hear on the news, they say, well, they just shut down all buses to the states of Oaxaca, Guerrero, and Jalisco. And I said, okay, well, we should be fine. I mean, we're going to the state of Guanajuato. 3 minutes later, we get to the bus station, and there's just, people everywhere standing there, like in a strange state. We get out of the Uber, go in, and it's very clear that they just moments ago had made the decision to shut down all buses nationwide. And I got to admit, that was a little bit of a sort of 9/11 moment for me. I would say the only other time I guess I felt that kind of like, oh my God, what's happening, was 9/11. And it was just like, how bad is this going to get, right? Again, I was still at that point probably seeing a lot of fake things. And so it just was like, how bad could this get? So that's sort of where my head was in the morning.
Well, and you, because of all the fake news, I always turn to Mexico News Daily, and they started cranking out articles immediately, and still have through the week, and they've been great. But you wrote a cool article, or maybe it was a perspective just on some of the numbers that Mexico News Daily was doing, just like website hits and stuff. And we were chatting about that, just how it basically blew up. I think you said you had 6,000 site visits in 1 second on Mexico News Daily's site or something.
It was just one of these sort of maybe once in a lifetime things where we had people in real time ready to write about this, and they did. And so we published, I really believe, one of the first articles of any news outlet globally. And the reason, or the evidence I have of that, is we posted it, and as you said, we got 6,000 hits on that article in 1 second, and it took down our site. So we, this biggest moment ever, we were first, we get an article out, and it shuts down our site. Luckily, we were able to get it back up within a few minutes again, with working with our server company. And, they told us we had sustained 100 site visits per second most of the day. So we completely opened up, all the paywall and all the sort of normal gates we have to access.
Yeah, that was awesome when you did that, because, in times of crisis like that, especially when you guys are providing real news, to remove that paywall, to disseminate the information, accurate information to everyone that lives here and all over the world, that was a great move.
Yeah, we made that decision just because it would just feel wrong to be charging people to be reading, sort of real time what's going on. And you mentioned the fake news. That's something we're dealing with as well, right? So we were looking at these images of people screaming at the Puerto Vallarta airport and running away from what they said were, cartel members shooting people at the airport. And of course, the famous image of an airplane burning at the airport, which isn't true. There was another image that our team debated. We weren't sure. Later in the day, there was this image of Sheinbaum arriving in a helicopter on a Navy ship. And so, of course, you think, well, it makes sense. The country is a little crazy right now. The safest thing for her to do is sleep on a Navy ship out in the ocean. And it turns out
turned out to be untrue.
Yeah, totally false, right? It was she visited a Navy ship a few months earlier, and it was a video from that. But, our own team as well, on a personal level, to comfort ourselves and our family members and friends, but also as we're trying to figure out what do we publish, had to kind of filter through this, this increasingly fake news world. And we're seeing it with Iran right now. You see all kinds of videos and first person journalism, and it turns out a lot of it isn't true.
Yeah, that's certainly unfortunate. Then it was sort of interesting for me. Then after Monday, everyone's just kind of wondering, well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Obviously, they canceled school on Monday,
Yeah.
and then it looked for a while that they were going to have school on Tuesday, which. My kids live in Sayulita and they go to school in Puerto Vallarta. So that means they have to take a bus from Sayulita to Puerto Vallarta. And I think, we were obviously pretty nervous about putting our kids on a bus on Tuesday to go to school. And they decided to just let everybody relax for a day and they didn't have school. But it was sort of crazy how quickly Puerto Vallarta bounced back, right? There was, no civilians killed. There was no real violence. It was basically just disruption, blockades, burning cars, which they got cleaned up quickly. And our kids did go to school on Wednesday, took the bus into Puerto Vallarta. Not only did they go to school, but I was comfortable with them going to school. We had driven around and I had seen how everything had come back. And, if you listen to the, whatever fake news or big media outlets, you would have thought Puerto Vallarta was a war zone, and
And would be like sort of uninhabitable for months or something, right?
totally, and that just was not the case at all. Like I
So
said,
George, let me ask you a personal question. I mean,
Sure.
if you look at, we're a week out from everything happening. If you look at yourself and your wife and your kids and just give an honest answer, how much back to normal are each of you mentally and sort of with your routine and comfort level? How would you
I would
describe?
say routine, 100% back to normal, and for several days, 100% back to normal. Mentally, I don't want to call it PTSD, but that's a huge event to happen and to live through, and it was scary. I'm not gonna lie. And especially when you have kids, like, what are the kids thinking? And even the kids were on their phones getting all this information, and I didn't know what they were reading, and so I'm still, I wouldn't say scarred, but it shook me up for sure. I'm not gonna lie, but now, life is 100% back to normal, not just in Sayulita, because in Sayulita, it didn't really affect anything, but even in Puerto Vallarta, it's just sort of, all things back to normal.
Yeah, I would say in my case, my wife and I think you said it very well. I mean, from a routine standpoint, 100% back to normal, right? Going out to eat, going to the office, going to the grocery store, and you just see everybody else doing the same. So I think for those that are thinking there's this like lingering fallout in terms of people's ability to conduct their normal lives, it's not true. But I agree with you. There's this little something. I remember I was in Mexico City, I don't know, 6-7 years ago when there was the huge earthquake. And it took me a while from a PTSD. I still took business trips to Mexico City every month, but I was a little more nervous when I was going to bed at night in a high-rise hotel. There was that sort of PTSD for a few months before I really it just got out of my head. And I think it's going to be the same case here. Just there's this little bit in the back of your head that's still there, and it'll take.
Yeah, it's going to take
a
some
while.
time. It's going to take some time. It was a dramatic event. Whether all of it was true or not, it was still a dramatic event. And, that's going to take some time to sort of recover and heal from.
I guess my last question to you would be, how do you think the mood is of the business community, right? The business community where you live and where I live is so reliant on tourism, right? And so how is their mood? How is their sentiment? How are they doing?
Great question. I think it's sad for them what happened, right? Sayulita especially and Puerto Vallarta, super reliant on tourism, and an event like this obviously has a major impact on that tourism. So, I think while they're certainly happy to be back open, they're of course mulling the idea this is going to have a dramatic effect on the rest of our season. People are canceling, vacations, canceling rentals. I personally have a rental, and on Sunday when it was all going down, the woman was texting me saying, hey, we want to cancel our rental, and I didn't even respond. I was dealing with my family and everything, but I said, listen, we're not going to, keep anybody's money who doesn't want to come here, but give it a little bit, give it a couple weeks before you make a decision like that. And I hope more people do that, give it some time to see how all of this shakes out before just writing off Mexico or vacations or whatever on a whole, because I think that's a mistake. We're basically already back to normal, and these businesses are nervous and worried that it's not going to get back to normal fast enough, and they're a bit solemn, I would say, if that makes sense.
That's a good way to describe it. I mean, I think you started by saying sad, and I feel that way here too, and I think a little bit. We didn't actually discuss this, my wife and I, but the last 2 days we've gone out to eat and supported local businesses. And I think it was a little bit just wanting to show a little solidarity, knowing that they're hurting and they're sad. And I would say, you described it well. You go out and everyone's putting their best face on it. They're not scared of violence or anything. They're scared and nervous about the next couple months, which should have been high season and tons of tourists, is going to be half of what it was, a week ago. And obviously, for tourists and micro businesses and stuff, that those extra dollars make a huge impact on them. And so you just see the sadness that sort of social media narrative took over, implying that Mexico was, spiraling out of control. And then just the heaviness of knowing now that it's going to be some lean months as people canceled. And I would just, I guess I'd end just challenging people, just read about the reality of what's going on, right? I mean, last night there was a horrible shooting in Austin, Texas, right? And a couple people were killed and 14 more were injured by a shooting on what is, the most popular touristy entertainment street in Austin, Texas. And I don't think anyone would suggest not traveling or visiting Austin, much less Texas, much less the United States.
Totally.
Right? And that's a little bit, for some reason, that's what's happened in Mexico. I have some family that actually just canceled a trip to Cancun. And where they live in the United States is like closer to where this went down in near Puerto Vallarta.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Mexico's a huge country, and this stuff was isolated to sort of two areas, right? I mean, it was basically in Guadalajara and in and around Puerto Vallarta, and people then to cancel a trip to Oaxaca or Mexico City because of a 1 day's event in a region that is 1,000 miles away doesn't make any sense. But it's unfortunate because that's what's happening.
We have another writer who's Riviera Maya based, and she just flew into the Cancun airport yesterday. So think Saturday, high season, and she said it was a ghost town. And I'm just, I can't believe that the narrative got that out of control, that people would cancel, an all-inclusive hotel in Cancun, which is like 1,000 miles away from where this happened. Like I said, Texas is closer than Cancun. And so, I think part of what George and I wanted to do here was just talk through our own personal experiences of what happened that day, what happened in the aftermath this week, but also just encourage people to really get informed. Don't let the hysteria and the motivations of people seeking clicks or seeking notoriety with fake news control how you think and act, right? That was really what this was about, George, right?
Totally, totally. Well,
Good.
thanks, man. I appreciate it. And I don't know, it was just kind of not fun or funny, but it was just kind of cool. I remember on Sunday, me and you going back, and you were, just, the text stream between us was, interesting, and checking on each other, and, hearing about what Mexico News Daily was doing. I don't know. I felt like I kind of had a behind the scenes look
you were a guest.
into the MND sort of newsroom via text. So
Yeah.
that was one highlight of an otherwise terrible day.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing your personal experience through this, George, and we'll keep talking as the days and weeks come.
Awesome. Take care, Travis.
Thank you.